And when you are on the moon or the Mars, you have to grow your own food. There's no way around it. The cost of taking food and raw materials from Earth is prohibitive. So what, $10,000 per kilo or something
Per
like
kilo,
that? Yeah.
right. Let's imagine space travel, like deep space travel.
Yeah.
Having plants alongside with you when you are space travel is another added benefit, psychological.
Oh, absolutely. And on the International Space Station, there are astronauts, and there's a plant production unit. And astronauts get to run experiments. So they're growing some lettuce and peppers and all that. And then when asked what's your favorite part of your day, most of the astronauts say, yeah, working with plants is their favorite part. There was an experiment done by researchers at the University of Florida. They got some moon soil and they grew Arabidopsis plants in that soil for a few days. What they found was that the plants growing in moon soil compared to earth soil, let's say, had some signs of stress. So they didn't grow as well, but at the same time, they did grow.
So you mean investing in space agriculture would really improve the agriculture on Earth?
Yeah, spot on. The whole field of vertical farming is a spin-off from NASA's exploration into growing plants in controlled environments.
What's the difficulty in growing rice in space?
In theory, you can grow rice, you can grow wheat as well. Yeah, wheat at least was one of the candidate crops that was tested. When NASA began their testing in the 60s and 70s, wheat was studied quite heavily. But just the energy required to keep them growing for such a long time, 60 to 120 days, can be prohibitive. And the harvest index is so low. I'll just say one thing, plants are more crazy and interesting than you think they are. We're just beginning to scratch the surface
of the plant science
and plant consciousness.
Hey guys, welcome back to QED Podcast. And today's episode, I'm really delighted. I've been waiting for this episode for a long time. In this episode, we are going to talk extensively on something called space agriculture, which is nothing but more specifically growing plants in microgravity conditions. So we have a space farmer here. Let's welcome Ajwal D'souza, who is a research student from University of Guelph in Canada, one of the top research institute in the field of agriculture. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Clinton. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been waiting for this as well, so I'm glad to be here and excited to talk about this topic.
Yeah. If I search space agriculture at University of Guelph, Ajwal pops up in the picture.
Oops.
Yeah, look good. You look good.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is how you look.
Yes. Yeah, I can talk about that as well.
Okay. So what's happening in the background?
So that picture is, so we in the lab, so I study at University of Guelph, as you mentioned, but I'm a part of a lab called the Controlled Environment Systems Research Facility. And essentially the lab was started with the focus on one question is how would we grow plants in space? And if we have to grow plants in space, then we would need certain systems that accompany the whole infrastructure. And born of that question, the lab started its research project, and it has our lab has done many research projects on this topic. But recently, because there's news, with the Artemis program, humans are going back to the moon, and then eventually, even Musk is pushing the move to Mars. The interest in extraterrestrial habitation is increasing, and if the one thing that we need for any of this to work is food, because humans cannot sustain themselves without food. And when you are on the moon or the Mars, you have to grow your own food. There's no way around it. The cost of taking food and raw materials from Earth is prohibitive. It's time consuming. So
very expensive.
Expensive, exactly. So what, $10,000 per kilo or something like
that?
Yeah.
Right.
So the astronauts have to grow their own food. And because this is becoming such a hot topic, NASA and the Canadian Space Agency, they sort of jointly called this competition called the Deep Space Food Challenge. And essentially the goal is to develop a system under a given set of constraints. So they had constraints on volume, energy, water, time spent on the system, etc. You have to build a system that can sustain 4 astronauts for 2 years. And as part of our entry from our lab, we developed a system called Canada GOOSE, and GOOSE here stands for Growth Options for Outer Space Environment. So the picture that you're seeing is a prototype of that GOOSE system, and essentially what it is a the final version of it is a refrigerator-sized growth chamber in which you can control all the environment conditions. There are LED lights that provide lighting for the plants to grow, and we can grow plants in a hydroponic setup, essentially without the need for soil. And we can grow different kinds of crops, from lettuce to microgreens, tomatoes, radishes.
Nice.
Cherry tomatoes, yeah. So the image you're seeing is just me standing in front of that system. Yeah.
So you are taking part in something called Deep Space Food Challenge.
Yes.
So tell me about that competition.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the competition was to call for designs from companies, institutions, or even individuals to develop a system under a given set of constraints. The main constraints were on mass and energy, and also volume. So the system has to be under 2 meter cubes.
2 meter cube.
Yeah, of volume. Think roughly of the size of a fridge in terms of volume, that big. Energy, the lower the energy, the better. Energy consumption. Water, the lower the better. And also crew time. So you wouldn't want astronauts to be spending hours a day on the system. The ideal suggestion was 4 hours per week.
To maintain and operate that system.
Yeah, to maintain, operate, clean, harvest, everything. And there's no limit in terms of what you can grow. So that was the competition. So it was launched by NASA on the American side, and then Canadian Space Agency on the Canadian side. So it was, I think, funded by the same organization, but they ran in tandem. So it was not the same thing. So there was American competitors and Canadian competitors. And the systems that were submitted ranged from growing algae and using algae for food products, growing insects, and then harvesting the insects for insect protein. There was a yeast-based system where you can use the yeast to create other products
through genetic engineering.
Yeah, so you're using yeast to make bacon or something like that. And ours was because we have our expertise in plant production, so ours was mainly a plant production center. We also had mushrooms in the system, so the top 70% was growing plants, and then we had a bottom unit that grew mushrooms. So that way we supplement we have the plant part.
Let's talk about that in great detail.
Okay.
Eventually.
Yeah.
Nice. I mean, I want to get into your system, what you guys are building in great detail, component by component.
Okay.
So let's, before that, this is about the challenge. Like your PhD is, you're simultaneously competing in this competition, alongside with your PhD.
Yeah. So my PhD work is separate, which is growing medicinal plants, which I can happy to talk about that as well. But this was mainly space focused.
Okay.
The whole thing took about 3 years. So the first phase was just coming up with a proposal and a design. Second phase was building a prototype, and the third phase was building the actual system. So along the line, there were a lot of students were part of the team. And I think as a group, we had amazing students who were really capable, and we all designed the system. So it's by no means my work, but the teamwork. The teamwork.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the journey, your journey into hands-on working on something related to space. How did you start your journey into agriculture?
Yeah.
And how did you end up doing what you do?
Yeah. So we'll have to go way back to when I was in my...
Were you always interested in agriculture, like when you were a kid?
Not really. I mean, I come from a farming background, so I grew up in a farming household. So I had that connection, but I wasn't really drawn to it. But once I was in 10th and 11th, let's say, first PUC, I was as confused as pretty much everyone Maybe one of you out there. But when the time came, I had to decide what I'm going to do next for my, after my PUC. So I sat down one day and I wanted to pursue something that was really important.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked myself, okay, what's the most important thing? Okay, so started, let's say, engineering. Okay, engineers are important, right? So they build all the infrastructure we have, all the technology we have, all the apps, all the phones, pretty important. But they come home at night and they sit down for food. They have to eat. Same thing with doctors. Very important. They help you save your life, improve your health and whatnot. But again, they come home and they have to eat. Like lawyers, they have to come and eat. So the common element for any of the other professions to exist or humans to exist was food. So I thought that's the most fundamental thing I can, fundamental thing I can study and work on. So I ended up pursuing, agriculture for my undergrad. I got into the University of Agricultural Sciences in Dharwad. And while I was there, so agriculture was sort of my, not passion, but sort of an important goal, something challenging, so, an important problem to solve, right? So food crisis and all that. But as a kid, as every kid is, I was interested in space, rockets, NASA, whatever NASA's doing, cool pictures of Saturn, the moon, whatnot. So that interest, I think every kid is interested in space. So I had that interest. But when I was in my undergrad, I had a professor, Dr. Ravikumar Hosmani, and he joined the university, and he had previously worked at NASA. So I was puzzled, like, what is a person who has worked at NASA doing here in an agricultural college?
In Dharwad.
Yeah, and I got to talk to him, and I got to know about what he did before, and he mentioned about this whole field of space agriculture. So at that point, something connected, because agriculture as a profession was really meaningful to me, but at the same time, space was really exciting and curious. I'm always curious and passionate, right? So putting those two things together is just clicked. And I didn't even know those two things could exist in one plane. So once I came to know about this whole field of, growing plants in space, so I just took my passion and then took my interest, if I would say so, in one place, and that's how I ended up in space agriculture. So I wanted to pursue something in space agriculture. And one of the main venues that comes up if you Google space agriculture and, controlled environment systems, which I can talk about later, but essentially space agriculture is the CESRF lab that I'm working at. And then I was fortunate enough to get a master's student position there. And then I have not left since. So we have a running joke in our lab that anybody who comes there stays there for the rest of their life, because that's the place where we do what we do. There's no other place. So you stay there forever.
Nice. So what have you, you came here for vacation for a while.
Yeah.
So just before coming, leaving your university, so what were you working on hands-on?
Currently, I'm working towards my PhD project, which is growing medicinal plants in controlled environments. So you have your typical field production, right? So you grow plants outside in a field, and you have control of some elements, right? You can control the water availability through irrigation. You can control the nutrients available through fertilization. Maybe you can control the pest incidents or pest attacks through pesticides. And you can control the genetics of the plants. But the way plants grow is shaped in part by the genetics, but also the environment. Now, we have mostly we have the control of the other part, but environment was not really controlled, right? You're growing in a field. But now you can bring the plants in a indoor setup where it can control all the environment conditions that a plant needs. So take light, temperature, CO2, humidity, the vapor pressure deficit, what else? The nutrient composition, etc. So you can control each of these parameters and provide the ideal environment for the plants. So using this setup, you can grow pretty much any plant in theory, except trees. But you can grow any plants, and you can grow fruit crops, and you can also grow medicinal plants. Now, the case for medicinal plants is that any plant is medicinal because of some compounds, some chemical compounds in the plant, right? And the production of these compounds, in addition to the genetics, is also driven by the environment, right? So some sort of environmental stress or environmental trigger can produce these compounds, typically fall under secondary metabolites. So one thing is you can grow these plants indoors and provide the exact environment signal that can trigger the production of these medicinal compounds. But also, because it's medicine, you need stricter regulations. Right? You can grow medicinal plants in the field, but then there's a risk of contamination with heavy metals or excess nutrients. You have pest attacks, diseases, and the weather is,
uncertain.
Uncertain. You cannot control it. So the plants you get from this season might be completely different from the next season, right? In terms of, even if you use the same genetics, because the environment is different, you have a different profile of the chemical compounds. Now you eliminate this problem by bringing them indoors, and you give them a precise environment. And so each plant is similar to the other plant as much as possible. And even from from batch to batch, right? So this year's plants will be similar to next year's plants because you have the exact same environment. So a good case can be made for the need of controlled environments for medicinal plants particularly. And also it's the plants that are grown indoor are safer, cleaner. You can control what goes into the system. So there's dramatic decrease in the risk of contamination and whatnot. Yeah, and the plants are more standardized so that you know exactly what's in the plant, the chemical composition and the chemical profile, such that if you have to make a drug, it has to be highly regulated. So controlled environments are really essential.
Right. So what medicinal plants are you working on?
Currently, I'm working on a few medicinal plants that are prevalent in the Chinese medicinal system. I don't know if I can say this.
It's a confidential information.
Probably. So I think.
Yeah, I think we can move on.
Yeah.
You can tell me afterwards.
Yeah, I'll let you know, but then I have to kill you. But yeah, some medicinal plants of the Chinese medicinal system, and because there's, in the East, China, India, we have a lot of medicinal plants that are baked into our culture, right? So if you're sick, the first thing you run out for is some sort of plant that your mom grinds in, makes you, drink.
Right.
So there's a lot of market for that. But even the West is realizing the potential of medicinal plants. So
now let's get into space agriculture.
Yeah.
As a whole industry or whole landscape. Why do we need to invest in space agriculture? Why Canadian Space Agency is investing in something as space agriculture? So what is the need?
Yeah. Before justifying space agriculture, I think we have to justify space exploration, right?
Right.
And we say humans are explorers and all that, but at a more practical level, whenever we explore something, whenever we explore a new territory, we develop technologies to explore the unexplored terrain, and we find something that might be useful for the society as a whole, right? So going to space has, while it's expensive, has brought in a lot of technologies that we aren't even aware of. I think off the top of my head, I think ballpoint pen has something to do with space.
Right.
GPS has some. The GPS in our phones came about because of space.
So you mean investing in space agriculture would really improve the agriculture on Earth?
Yeah, spot on. Yeah. So we need to explore space, and then when we explore space, we inevitably do need food, and then investing in space production of food will force us to develop technologies and improve plant genetics in different ways that will then trickle down
right
eventually to Earth, terrestrial production. So although the upfront cost is high, there are definitely benefits for humans on Earth on a broad scale. So that's why we need space.
And even if you look at, let's imagine space travel, like deep space travel, and like having plants on our side growing along, like it's very psychological benefit, right?
Yes.
Like seeing something, because you're like heading to something which is pretty barren, like no living things. Having plants alongside with you when you are space travel is another added benefit, psychological.
No, absolutely. And if there are, on the International Space Station, there are astronauts, and there's a plant production unit, and astronauts get to run experiments on that plant production unit. So they're growing some lettuce and peppers and all that. And then when asked what's your favorite part of your day, most of the astronauts say, working with plants is their favorite part, because we have such a connection with plants.
Right. It's like a spiritual relationship.
Exactly. Yeah. Even if you're not a farmer, having some plants at home, just caring for plants, watering the plants there's something relaxing about it. So having plants in a spaceship, let's say, is important for the psychological benefits.
Right.
100%. Yeah.
So how do they grow differently in microgravity? Like, what are the challenges plant would face in the microgravity or space environment when compared with Earth?
Because plants are growing in microgravity, it's interesting because all the other environment conditions, right, keep changing over the evolutionary scale. But gravity, not so much. It's constant, right? But there has been a change in gravity, which is when plants came out from mainly aquatic habitat onto land. Because
from algae to terrestrial.
Yeah, if a plant is growing underwater, any underwater plants, they don't really, like, there's a different buoyant force, right? But going onto the land is completely different ballgame. And then once the plants are on the land, there's competition for light. Mainly light. So you have to grow upwards you have to be the first one to get the lights, and the plants underneath will not get it. So then there was evolutionarily the emergence of lignin, which provides structure, like solid structure to the plants, and that's how we got trees. Anyways, going back to the gravity part. So plants, you might think that are not exposed to a change of gravity, they have some sort of exposure to it, and they have like in their genes, they do have mechanisms to counteract these problems. So when you grow something in space, let's take the space station, for example, right? It's microgravity, right? Very low gravity. So plants, they grow a bit wonky. Okay, so they don't. The structure is weird. They are much more elongated. There's no the gravity, the force of gravity directing them in a particular way. Because on Earth, you have the gravity that directs plants upwards and downwards. There's a light and gravity. So gravity attracts plants downwards. Light attracts plants upwards. So that's how plants orient themselves. The roots downwards, the shoots upwards. But in space, that's not really there. So if you grow plants in complete darkness in microgravity, plants are all confused. But then if you add light, plants will use that light as a
indicator for the growth.
Yeah, the alignment, and that way they can counteract some of the loss of gravity. The other main thing is that the water uptake from the plants, the transpiration, all the hydraulic, the vascular system, the movement of water, the absorption of water is all driven by capillary action, and gravity sort of plays a part in that. But then removing the gravity affects the water uptake and water nutrient uptakes of the plants, which is water uptake and then the gas exchange. So the fluid dynamics is really what gets messed up more than the biology itself. So the plants will grow just fine, but as long as they're able to get water into the system, which is a bigger challenge than the genetics itself. And as long as you shield the plants from radiation in the space, they should be fine. But yeah, that's the major challenge with space. Yeah.
What about the root growth? Is there any difference with the root growth patterns?
Yeah, the structure will be affected. Typically, you see the roots growing longer, I think. But the biology is I'm sort of not too expert at this point, but there's definitely an effect.
Right.
Yeah.
So what about gaseous exchange? Does microgravity has any influence on how they open and close the stomata of the leaves?
Yeah, so microgravity and also the low pressure hypobaria has an effect on gas exchange, because there's the partial pressure difference and the pressure difference that sort of drives the gradient. The gradient drives the movement of the fluids, and gas being technically being a fluid. Right. So the rate at which that gas is exchanged can be diminished under low pressure.
And what about the seed germination? Is there? Do you know? Have you read about anything on rate of growth compared to Earth and in space? Do they grow faster in space, or do they grow slower in space?
Probably not. I don't know in concrete, but probably not the same. But there was one project where from our lab where we sent out barley seeds, and they were exposed. So they were sent out and they were exposed to the radiation from the space. So there's a unit on the space station where you can put stuff out there which is exposed to the space radiation, the cosmic radiation. So the barley seeds were exposed to the radiation. They sat there for a few months, and then they were brought back to Earth on the SpaceX rocket, and then we germinated them not me, but people in our lab. They germinated those seeds, and most of them germinated just fine. Yeah. And a fun fact: the barley part of that barley. So part of this project was funded by Glenlivet, the well-known makers of whiskey, single malt Scotch, in Scotland. So they sponsored part of this project, and some of that barley that was sent to space came back, is shipped to the Glenlivet distillery, and they'll use some of that barley to make some whiskey, and then in a few years expect a special edition space whiskey. So I'm keeping my eye out on that.
Do you think a plant has to adapt any physical changes to grow in space? Like if we keep the plant exposed in space, microgravity condition for long enough so that they adapt to something, to the growth condition in space. So what are the evolutionary changes that we can expect in plant if they kept long enough in space, do you think?
I think the architecture of the plant would be a dominant effect. They might not grow the same way as they might be more spread out or less bushy, stuff like that.
In terms of vascular system, how do they, in handling fluid dynamics of nutrient carrying and water transport?
Most of that should be unaffected. It's how the water gets into the roots is the challenge. So yeah, I don't know.
Once it gets into the root, then there's no problem. Capillary action.
Yeah, it's a capillary action. So getting into the root is the problem. The surface tension. The surface tension is
right.
That gets affected. Surface tension is another sort of key driver, right?
So have you noticed any, or heard about any molecular changes in the plants when it is grown in space?
Yes. So when plants are grown in space, in a microgravity environment, let's say, there are a whole host of, if you look at the transcript, right, the proteins and the RNA, DNA activity of the plants. A whole host of stress response genes get activated. So plants perceive that sort of as a stress, but they're able to counteract. Their signatures, if you measure them biochemically, if you analyze the biochemistry and the transcripts, you find signs of stress. But again, plants are able to adapt to those stress. They have mechanisms to counteract that. And a similar thing, when there was an experiment done by researchers at the University of Florida, they got some moon soil from the actual moon soil from the moon that the astronauts got back from the Apollo missions. And they grew Arabidopsis plants in that soil for a few days. What they found was that the plants growing in moon soil compared to Earth soil, let's say, had some signs of stress. So they didn't grow as well, but at the same time, they did grow. So it's not like there was zero germination. They did germinate and they did grow, which is hopeful. Think of it like growing plants in a problematic soil where there's some contamination or imbalance of nutrients. Something like this is happening. Because they do grow, we can tackle the rest of the things.
So you may end up with a bitter cucumber or something.
Yeah, it should be fine. and when you're in space, your senses get muted.
Right.
So a bitter cucumber would be welcome, I think.
The system you guys work on is called closed loop habitat. Am I right? Partially.
We no longer use that exclusively. I think it began initially. So the closed loop habitat, the idea is where you have a system where the energy and mass doesn't escape the system, and all the resources such as water, nutrients, carbon is recycled within the system, and you build an ecosystem where plants and humans are sort of interacting, right? So plants release carbon dioxide when they photosynthesize, which plants release oxygen. Oh my God. Plants release oxygen when they photosynthesize, which the humans can breathe in and release CO2. And that CO2, the plants can absorb for photosynthesis. So that is sort of a closed system. Same thing with nutrients.
So you guys used to work on that before. So what did you mean by you guys no longer use that?
So we don't have a system that does that. Explicitly, but our lab has worked with a consortium. It's a consortium of research centers that developed a program called Melissa. The goal of the project, Melissa, is to develop this closed loop system. How would you recycle the mass and energy within a system? The human inputs, human outputs, with plant inputs and outputs.
No escape from this system.
As much as possible. So why is it difficult to build such a system? Well, there's a lot of conversions that has to happen, right? Some of it is seamless. So the gaseous part is fine. Humans breathe in, breathe out. Plants, breathe in, breathe out. That's okay. But the physical matter part, when humans consume the plants, which is fine. But then the byproduct of humans, right? So human waste, that has to be, if it goes back into the system, there's so many problems and regulations, safety concerns you have to address. You also have to change the form of those materials. Even consider plants. Let's say you're growing tomatoes, right? So you grow the tomato from start to finish. You harvest your tomatoes, which has the nutrients and calories that humans need. But then you have the plant, which is, in traditional sense, a waste, right? The plant it's thrown away. Right. But in space, there's no thing as waste. You cannot throw things away. So you have to figure out to convert that inedible plant mass into something that can be useful. Okay. Typically, that would be converting, decomposing that and then breaking it down, let's say by composting, and then reusing that for plant production. So the nutrients in that inedible portion will be put back into the system and the plants will use it again. If it's something like lettuce, you eat most of the plants with only a little bit of roots left. But if it's a tomato plant, then you have to manage the whole thing. So you have to figure out how to convert that safely, effectively, and make sure how to, extract as much, resources as you can, being, carbon and nutrients, and also water. So you have to take the water out, then extract the nutrients, extract the carbon. So that conversion is problematic, because if you're using any biological, if it's a chemical system, if you're just physical or chemical system, you're just burning it and then using the ash in some form, it's fine. But if you're using a biological system to compost plants, it's not consistent, right? It can change from
time
batch to batch.
intensive as
Yeah,
well.
exactly. And then not being standardized can create some issues. You want something to be as standardized as possible. That improves your, efficiency, at least in space. So that's a challenge we have to figure out. The conversion process of mass. So that's a major, challenge in building a closed loop system. But eventually there's entropy. So you cannot run a completely perfect closed loop system. So you still have to bring in
Battle with entropy.
Yeah, you still have to bring some raw materials, 100%. But bringing in the raw materials is not the problem. It's that maintaining that closed loop is the problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's a challenge.
So how does it look like? It's like a rectangular box or something. I mean, that's what comes to my mind when I think of closed loop system.
100%. So that would contain different components, different systems. If you think of Earth, it's sort of it's not a purely closed system in that we get energy from the sun.
Right.
But otherwise, you have mass and energy sort of recirculating within the ecosystem, right? So plants die, decompose, go into the soil. Soil microbiome, handles the decomposition. The nutrients are then used back by the plants. There's the water exchange. We eat plants for our food, stuff like that. So a closed loop system for space would be something like you'll be probably living underground because it provides shielding from the radiation. You might have a plant production center where it's a room that you walk in and there's, it's controlled environment. You have plants growing in hydroponic setup, let's say under LED lights. And then you take the harvests from there and then take it into your human living quarters where humans then can cook and eat it. And then any human waste will probably go out. Human waste and plant waste will go out to another system which handles the waste, converts it into whatever usable form. If it's a composting system, it's a composting system. If it could also be an incinerator, or you can do physical chemical treatment. You could do anaerobic digestion. There are many different options. So there will be some sort of system to handle the waste and convert it, and then you bring that back into the plant production system. So that's sort of a very crude setup of how that would look like. There will also be the air handling systems. The air will be circulated throughout the system such that whatever CO2 that's emitted by humans will be used by the plants and vice versa.
So the closed loop system is what being used in this space, ISS, like International Space Station, by the astronauts to grow food.
It's so the system used in the International Space Station is sort of a closed loop system, particularly for water.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so literally, today's urine is tomorrow's coffee in the space station.
Right.
Yes. So whatever the astronauts pee out gets cleaned and then comes back in the system as drinking water. So that's
strong espresso.
Oh yeah. So that's physical chemical systems. There's no biological life support system. So biological life support system is where you incorporate the biological components, right? Using plants, using microbes to recycle or convert mass and energy in the system, which is sort of the next step. And for any long-term habitation, I think it has to be some form of biological and physical chemical. We need both, but we definitely need biological. We can't rely solely on physical and chemical.
Creating closed loop system is like a great challenge. It's a necessary technology for space agriculture. Like if we have to grow things on space, it seems crucial.
Yeah.
You mean we haven't reached perfection in our closed loop system?
Not perfection. Yeah.
So so where is the challenge here to better this technology?
I think dealing with the inconsistency of a biological system or low predictability of a biological system, it gets much more complex. The microbiome, let's say, the microbes in the system, the plants, how they react, and something as simple as composting. You compost plants, right? So the water content in the plants can affect how well it's composted. The mixture, so if it's 50 kg of tomato plants and 50 kg of lettuce plant waste, right? That outcome, if you compost that, it's a different product than composting only tomato plants or some other mixture, right? So the system is not homogeneous.
Right.
That's one challenge. So you don't know exactly what you can expect from the compost. What is the balance of nutrients, right? If you have too much of nitrogen or too much of phosphorus or not enough nitrogen. So it's hard to deal with that inconsistency. And dealing with that inconsistency is also dependent on sensor technologies. So you have to know what's in the compost, let's say. And we don't have any reliable method of, just dipping a probe in the compost and saying, okay, this is the nutrient composition. We're not there yet. We have to do expensive, high performance liquid chromatography analysis to know what's in the
accurately.
Compost. Yeah. There's no handheld methods that can read some parameters. So the lack of sensors is also another challenge for all these for building the system, but it's progressing, I think, slowly. We have a lot of computer systems, computer vision that's getting better, but in terms of measuring the nutrients, that's a major challenge.
So you need to know every details what's happening in the it gets complex, as you said, like interaction of microbes with the plant and microbes with the dead plant, and microbes with the mixture of dead plants, and it's more complex and complex. Nice.
And even human waste, right? You don't know what's in the human waste.
So in the closed loop system, you also feed the human waste.
Ideally, if it's a purely closed loop system, then human waste is still some sort of resource, right? It's still part of the system. It has to go somewhere. But it's much more challenging for sure because of the sanitation and health risks. Yeah.
In that case, like what do you guys use if you guys not using closed loop system to study space or space agriculture? So what type of system you guys use? Another thing is, how do you guys simulate space conditions to study plant growth on Earth?
So we do a limited amount of focused space agriculture work at the moment. What we do have are growth chambers that has controlled environment. We can control the environment. We also have what we call the large hypobaric chambers, which are these massive chambers that you can put your plants in. You can seal it up, lock it, and then you can lower the pressure down to the pressure of Mars or Moon. And the main focus of ours is looking at how plants respond to environment conditions. So it's more of a biological study, not a ecosystem study. So our focus is mostly on
individual plants.
Yeah, so how do plants react at low pressure? How do plants react under... Now, because you're growing them indoors, you have to provide artificial lighting, right? So you have to provide electric lighting. So use LED lights. So that opens up a whole avenue to control plant growth using lights, using the color of the light, the duration of the light exposure, the intensity, the brightness of the light. So you can play with that. You can play with carbon dioxide. So you can improve the carbon dioxide, increase the carbon dioxide concentration to improve how plants grow, improve the biomass production. So that's the focus, because ultimately when plants are growing in space, they will be growing in some sort of growth chamber, and having the right environment such that you can grow plants more efficiently, so there's more biomass produced per unit resource, is a topic of concern for us. So that's mostly what we do in terms of, we have growth chambers and control environment growth chambers. And the other thing is we can measure. So all the growth chambers we have, pretty much all of the growth chambers we have, are completely sealed. So you can measure the gas exchange, so carbon dioxide exchange in the plants. And essentially CO2 or carbon dioxide exchange tells us about photosynthesis, how well the plants are photosynthesizing. And higher photosynthesis means higher biomass production. So the goal for food is, if you're growing lettuce, you want as much as lettuce as biomass, right? So tweaking the environment conditions such that you find the optimal point where the plants are growing efficiently, using less resources, using less nutrients, less light, but at the same time producing or maximizing the biomass produced, right? How many kilos of lettuce can you grow? And a direct application of this technology is controlled environment agriculture on Earth. The shape it takes is crudely greenhouses, but more specifically vertical farms. Right? You grow all your plants indoors in hydroponic trays, and because it's hydroponic, you can stack them up, and you can control the environment, control the light, CO2 temperature, humidity, etc. And that way you can grow more efficiently compared to in the field. So that's a direct terrestrial application. And you asked me, why should anyone care about space agriculture? And this is one of the direct
increasing
spin-offs.
the efficiency or output, agricultural output.
Yes. The whole field of vertical farming is a spin-off from NASA's exploration into growing plants in controlled environments. So there's a lot of work to be done, 100%, in terms of making vertical farms mainstream.
So your lab is in the hypobaric conditions, so operates on low pressure.
You could do that if you want, So
so you guys play with the factors that influence plant growth. So you guys can influence light condition, luminosity, concentration of carbon dioxide, pressure. Also, you can decrease or increase humidity, temperature. So, what is the answer you guys are searching for right now in the research?
So the most broad question is, how do plants react to certain environmental conditions in a controlled environment setup? And how could that be harnessed for commercial purposes? Okay. So that's the broadest arc of our research project. But within that, you have different research projects looking at different environment conditions and different desirable outcomes. So one example, one research project, student Matthew Wake, he worked on growing wheat in a controlled environment hydroponic growth setup, right? So the project looked at using or changing the light intensities, growing plants under different light intensities, and how that affects growth and also the grain yield of wheat. Okay. So that's one project. So, and he was interested in, can you bring the light intensity lower and still get the same yield, such that you can reduce the energy consumption? Right. My research project, and there are a couple of students under this general project, we look at different plant species, and there's another student looking at mushrooms, medicinal mushrooms, but they're not the psychoactive kind. Traditionally used, mushroom called reishi. And we're looking at, again, different environment conditions and how that affects the the biochemistry of the plant. So for medicinal plants, that's the main focus, right? So what the biochemical compounds of interest are and how we can increase them. We can manipulate the light, stress the plants with high light, and as a response, plants will produce compounds that are sort of a natural sunscreen. Okay, and these compounds have antioxidant and medicinal properties. That's one way. You can have UV stress, which acts similarly. You can have temperature stress. So yeah, you can play with all kinds of environment conditions. And this is for medicinal plants. What other projects do we have? We have projects that looked at biostimulants. So when you grow plants in hydroponics, you can add sort of a microbial consortium that produce some organic compounds that the plants respond to, and that potentially could increase the growth, or it could also increase its tolerance to diseases, right? So that's another sort of an environment condition, you could say, but that's another project. So the specific projects are wide-ranging, right? From light to medicinal plants to yield to productivity to
pressure, temperature,
yes,
humidity.
But yeah, the overall question is
there any database on how plants react to all these factors? Like with high intensity light, plant do this, like there is a high chlorophyll density in the leaf, or more growth pattern, or is there any database where they have stored all the plant changes to all these changing factors? That could be useful. So if anybody wants to build an efficient system of plant growth, they can look at the database and see, okay, tomato plant behaves like this with this factors. I think that would be a cool database to have, right?
yes. So there's I'm not aware of a specific database for controlled environments, but there is a newly created database for plant stress. So it's a database of how plants react to stresses, environmental stresses. I cannot recall the author's name of this paper, but there is a database on that. So it's a collection of all the research that's been done on how plants react to different stresses. What are the effects? If there's any transcriptome analysis done?
Right.
So what's the transcript? So the papers are linked, so you can sort through the whole database and figure out.
Amazing.
But there's no specific. I'm not aware of any specific database for plant environment interactions, but there are some meta-analyses. So taking all the studies of that have been done on plants,
right,
combining them, and then summarizing the
whole catalog.
So you can draw response curves. So if this is how do plants behave in terms of their biomass with the increasing light intensity. So typically, as you increase the light intensity, there's more biomass produced. Okay, so there are a couple of meta-analysis that have been done on summarizing the plant responses to light, CO2, maybe temperature. I'm not sure, but light and CO2 I know.
Nice.
Yeah, but yeah, databases would be helpful.
And how do you guys simulate microgravity condition?
We don't do it in our lab, but typically, wherever they do make, do these studies, there's something called a clinostat.
What? A clinostat?
Clinostat. So what it does is it's sort of a workaround for the for simulating gravity. It's not a pure microgravity system. Essentially, what gravity is a vector, right? So it's a force vector in a particular direction. For all practical purposes for the plant, that's gravity. Now, what a clinostat does is it's moving in all different axes. Like it keeps moving. It keeps changing the vector. So there's no one standard stable vector.
Right.
So all the vectors are canceled out, and it's the net vector applied on the plants or seeds is sort of zero. So it keeps changing and all. It's a cool system. It keeps rotating in different axes, and that way you're essentially tricking the plant, saying that there is no vector. That means there is no gravity. But the actual microgravity is in the space, in the ISS. So there are a lot of experiments that have been, setups that have been sent to the space station, and then they're exposed to true microgravity. Or, excuse me, some of the recent studies were done in the Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, the space flights that go to space. You get a brief window of microgravity where the plants, are exposed to the microgravity, and then you immediately, let's say, they developed a system, a contraption where you can, once they're exposed to microgravity at a specific time, you can deploy that system, and then it immediately captures the plant matter, and it's sort of, let's think of it as a way of taking a snapshot of the biochemistry at that moment, and it sort of captures it, and you can come back and then you can analyze it, what happened. So it sort of freezes it, let's say,
Right.
Speak in very crude sense, and then you can analyze the RNA, the proteins, and the gene actions of the
Metabolites.
plants. Yeah, once you come back, so you can look into what exactly is happening in the plant at that place and time in microgravity.
The transition from gravity to microgravity.
Yeah. So that's how it's done mostly. Yeah.
So it relies on the clinostat relies on the centrifugal force, is it?
The disruption of a constant centrifugal force, and it's sort of a simulation. It's not a true microgravity.
Right.
But
Right.
I have no hands-on experience on microgravity, but I did a research project just looking at the literature of not microgravity but hypergravity.
More gravity.
More gravity. So
Conditions of Jupiter.
yes, I mean, there's no immediate practical purpose of hypergravity, right? When we go to the moon or Mars, it'll be a microgravity situation. But it's easier to simulate hypergravity even in those places, right? You basically have to spin seeds or
Right.
plants. And it's from a biological standpoint, it's a curious question. Low gravity, yes. What about high gravity, right? So I did a brief research project on that, and we basically looked at how plants respond to hypergravity.
How did they respond to it?
So the main response of plants is that they grow shorter and more stout.
And thickness of the stem
Yes.
is thicker than the
Control.
controlled.
Yeah. So because they have to withstand more force that's acting on them under hypergravity, they have to strengthen their structure. So you
Nice.
find that there's more hemicellulose, cellulose, and lignin, which are these
Structural
polymers that
component.
they gives the structure, right? And then instead of growing longer, they grow outwards a bit, so thicker. That also provides more stability to the plant.
That's how we can do a bonsai rather than patiently cutting the trees. Subject the plant to hypergravity and
But they have to be spinning constantly.
constantly.
Because once you take them off of hypergravity, they will,
What happens later?
So they will grow. They will snap out of that.
Oh, okay. They respond immediately to the
Normal
eventually
gravity.
to the
Yes.
normal gravity.
Yeah, so it's not persistent, but they do have the memory though.
Right.
There's some sort of. I mean, there's so much we don't know. So
so much we don't know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's some sort of epigenetic mechanisms happening that has that the plants remember.
Right.
But yeah, they acclimate to the normal conditions, because anything that's not optimal is expenditure. So if plants have to grow under hypergravity, that means it's out of the normal. That means plants have to spend more energy and resources to counteract this, which is not ideal, right? So plants always, try to balance to get to the most optimal resource use.
Right. Like after having so much knowledge after consuming so much information, data, insight, did you how did it change your perspective? Like, did you have any curious observation from a different angle that nobody have seen it before? Like, about plants or about a relationship of plants or something?
That's a great question. I think the biggest realization is how much I don't know. It's a letdown answer, I know, but at the same time, how interconnected things are in terms of the planet and environment interactions. Yeah, plants are strange. They react to stuff pretty well. They can adapt to things pretty quickly. So far, I'm still working on some of the experiments. Haven't done much. Nothing concrete yet, so the experiments are still in progress. So nothing major from my PhD work at this point.
So the last time I had a conversation with you, like long back, I think you were working on seed germination under microgravity. So you were using centrifugal
that was
equipment.
hypergravity.
Oh, that was hypergravity. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. So this primary work was done at Dharwad, US Dharwad. So the professor I mentioned, my mentor, Ravi Kumar Hosmani. So his team and his student Basolingaya. So they worked on this project, and what they did was they spun wheat seeds. They subjected to hypergravity, and at a specific level, at 10 G for 12 and 24 hours. Seeds subjected to that treatment, they had increased germination and increased success rate of the plants growing, and that was reflected also in the transcript of the plants. There's some sort of stress response and stress adaptation going on that makes the plants to grow faster and better. I tried that to replicate sort of that study in my own lab with different crops. But I think the system I built my own system with the assistance from technicians in our lab. So I built my own centrifuge, but I was overambitious and chose an experimental design that was too complicated. So I couldn't find much, and that's another learning. Don't overcomplicate things; just keep it simple. But that was a brief project I did for my course. There was some difference. I used beans and barley. There was some difference in plants that were subjected to hypergravity, in that there was a very small increase in the root length and root dry matter. But I wouldn't rest a lot of confidence on that as yet.
So what are the other work your team is doing, like team is up to at the University of Guelph? Like I heard they're really well known for space agricultural research and innovation. So what else is cooking there?
What else is cooking? Yes. There are some projects in which our lab is working with the Canadian Space Agency and a private firm called Canadensis. It's a Canadian company that mainly makes rovers for lunar exploration, space exploration, and also satellites. But now they're dipping their toes into plant production units. So our lab, people in the lab, not me, but others in the lab, are working on designing a greenhouse for Moon and Mars, and studying how plants will respond to a lunar. How will plants
conditions? Yeah,
how would plants respond to the low temperatures, low pressure, and differences in the light duration on the
and low nutrient soil nutrient?
Well, not in the soil.
Okay, soil would be earth soil,
it would be hydroponic, so the nutrients will be supplied.
Right.
But the thing is, the temperatures, there's drastic temperature swings. The lighting could be different.
Right.
Depending on where
even
you land
in
on
temperature, there is not just low temperature, but also sudden fluctuation of temperature, right?
Huge drastic changes.
Right.
So how would plants
adapt to the
adapt to that.
fluctuations.
And just looking at germination, an initial 14 to 28 day growth period for now. So there's a project being done on that. That's in terms of the space.
Yeah.
In space research. But
about
we also
growing it on Mars, like how growing it on Moon is different than growing it on Mars, which is more challenging.
I think the challenges are similar. The gravity is different, but that shouldn't make a tremendous difference. But in terms of low resources, drastic temperature swings, no atmosphere, right? Radiation, those things are pretty much common to both. So the moon, that's why people are really focused on the moon. And people are like, why not go to Mars directly? But moon is an excellent test bed for anything we will do on Mars. The advantage we have on the moon is that it's close by. It's 3 days away.
Right, and it's visible from here.
Yes. So I shouldn't be saying this, but if something blows up, you can see it. All jokes aside, it's close by. So if you need any resources, any backup measures, it's you can get it quickly.
Right.
But Mars is a completely different ballgame. The shortest time period from transit from Earth to Mars is 2 months or something like that, which is a long time. And you have to build all the infrastructure required. So we haven't figured out how to do it on Moon, and then use that understanding and technology developed on Mars. But in terms of if you figure out how to do it on Moon, I think Mars will be easier.
So even if you grow plants on Moon and Mars, so they won't be growing on the native soil.
No.
So they would be growing on hydroponic or aquaponic systems.
Yes. Or maybe you could use the regolith, or it's called the regolith. You could use the Martian soil or the lunar soil, maybe treat it in some way and then bring it inside. But you cannot grow plants outside, like in a field.
Right.
It's just the pressure, the temperature, the radiation is just.
But soil is okay, like good to go.
Yeah, and there's also the concept of in situ resource use. Is basically taking whatever is on the planetary body, on the moon, on Mars, and then either treating it, changing it a bit, and then utilizing that instead of ferrying stuff from here. What that study showed, where I mentioned where plants, where they grew plants on lunar soil. It means you can grow plants in that soil, but you need some sort of treatment.
Like enhancing it with some growth factors, like
or microbes, rebalancing, improving the structure, maybe using some organic amendments, or changing the nutrient balance, because inherently it's sort of toxic to plants.
Right.
Yeah, and also the lunar soil is structurally is quite. It's sharp. So it's very abrasive.
Right.
It's not as smooth and pliable as soil. So that change in structure is also necessary. I think
it has to be treated before.
Yeah, some sort of organic amendments or something like that could be done, I think. But yeah.
But it's quite interesting, like terraforming. It's been a huge interest of mine since in my degree days, when I used to think about how a planet or a moon, like satellites, can be transformed or will be transformed when plants are grown. Like how the decomposition of plants would take place there, and how would it bring about the change in their native soil, and what next? Would life continue from there? Does it become more and more suitable for plant growth? There's so much knowledge to be acquired there in terraforming, and pretty exciting field.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what are the list of plants that grows the best in these environments, like in space especially? So what plants have been like astronaut friendly, you can say, what plants are quite hardest to grow?
In theory, you can grow pretty much any plant that you want, but the challenge is of infrastructure. The other challenge is limited resources. Okay, so let me explain. Lettuce is sort of the darling plant for controlled environments in space because it grows fast. 80-90% of the whole plant can be eaten. That means you're consuming more resources that you spend to grow the plants. Yeah, so the harvest index and the efficiency at which these grow, and they're fast, grow fast, makes leafy greens such as lettuce or basil very ideal. It's not necessarily food, right? It's just salads at best, right? You can grow tomatoes, which generally takes a bit longer, needs more resources, but again, the calorie-wise, it's more denser. But you get more plant wastage. Right, it's these constraints that limit what plants can be grown or ideal for space. And when in space, the main currency is energy, mass, and resources. Right, you want something that's as resource and mass efficient as possible. So that dictates what plants can be grown in space, at least at this point. So astronauts have grown lettuce, chili peppers, I think also tomatoes, but it's mostly these kinds of things. We're long ways off from growing something like wheat or rice.
Rice is my important question.
Yeah, you can grow them. You can, if
what's the difficulty in growing rice in space?
I would say, in theory, you can grow rice. You can grow wheat as well, and wheat and rice. Wheat at least was one of the candidate crops that was tested. There was a lot of interest for growing wheat in controlled environments. So when NASA began their testing in the 60s and 70s, wheat was studied quite heavily. But just the energy required to keep them growing for such a long time, 60 to 120 days, can be prohibitive. And expensive. And the harvest index is so low in that you get you grow these plants for all these weeks and months, and then only a small part of it, comes out as grains which you can eat, and the rest of the plant is
discarded,
practically a waste. Now you have to figure out how to
utilize the mass.
Exactly. So it gets prohibitively expensive to grow these plants.
Nice. Now I got the clarity.
Yeah. And they're taller growing, so you need more space in space. So volume is another constraint. So something that grows tall, so short, compact, and fast is the ideal. But also you have to balance it with the nutrients and calorie delivery. So it's a fine balance that you have to achieve between resource use and also calorie supplied. Something that comes close to that is potatoes. You can grow potatoes, which is calorie dense, and also
potatoes. Yeah, like you get the tuber in the bottom of, like when there is no soil, how do you grow potatoes in the hydroponic system? Yeah,
you grow them in hydroponics just like any other. So there are trays in which either the trays are drenched with nutrient solution repeatedly, or there's a thin film of nutrient solution that's constantly flowing in the trays. And you have to have some sort of support for the plant. But essentially the plant will grow the roots in the tray. So you'll have essentially a tray full of potatoes growing a potato plant. Yeah, and that's the plant that Mark Watney grew on Mars in The Martian. Yeah, the potatoes. So
but there was a fault in there, he couldn't have grown potatoes on Mars with the Martian soil. He put his poop, right?
Yeah, so he had to use some sort of
enhancer. There's an article of interest here which this says researchers from American Chemical Society, they came up with a space meal for astronauts. They used linear programming to design optimal space meal. So after running enough computation based on what can be grown, or the intention was nutrition. like calories, because it has to sustain their nutrition. Sustain their calorific, like calories they need to operate in space. Scientific considerations where space travelers burn more calories and require specialized nutrition, need for extra micronutrients like calcium, because their bones get looser, less denser because of lack of calcium.
Yes.
So they emphasize more on calcium in their nutrition and focus on sustainable and circular food production in space environments. So that meal is a vegetarian salad composed of soya beans. Can it be grown? Okay, I will tell you the list of things. You tell me if they can be grown. So if they can be grown well, then it can, astronauts can survive in space without any supply from Earth. Just basing this assumption on their work, the meal consisted of soya beans, poppy seeds, barley, kale, peanuts, sweet potato, and sunflower seeds. So complete protein is there, calcium is there. Where is protein? Soybeans.
Soybeans and groundnuts should be.
Protein. Soybeans, poppy seeds, barley, kale, peanuts, sweet potato, sunflower seeds. So do you think any of the ingredient is quite challenging to grow in space?
First thing that comes to my mind is
kale is easy, right?
Kale is easy.
Yeah.
Soybeans and groundnuts should also be easy.
Okay.
It shouldn't be an insurmountable challenge. You have to figure out some optimization, environment optimization, such that the plants grow faster, shorter,
right,
higher yield, and maybe some sort of genetic modification of the plants could definitely has a role. So that can be done. Barley also can be grown. Sunflower could be grown, but these are tall plants that grow for a long time.
Right. So some genetical modification is required.
Yes, but
to
also
shorten the time and.
I'm also thinking about the energy required to grow such a long duration crop.
Right.
Because if you think of sunflower plant, it's whole plant, it's flower.
Right.
And you just want the seeds.
And the seed is energy dense, such an energy dense that you extract oil from it, right? So it must be, it takes a long time to harvest that energy and store it in the seeds. So time also matters, like how fast it can grow, right?
Yeah, so if you have some sort of a nuclear plant powering the whole operation, then the energy part is fine, because you can't rely on solar. The amount of energy that you get on the Martian surface is really low compared to the Earth. So solar panels are not that efficient.
So what if you're in the space, not on any planet? So solar is enough?
I'm not entirely sure, but probably not. And I'm basing this answer based on the design of all the space probes. Very few of them some of them use solar panels, but a lot of them have the RTG. I think it's RTG, the nuclear
thermal generators.
So some sort of nuclear power generation system that's more reliable, I think.
This is the perfect ground for genetic testing. Here on Earth, people or scientists or companies meet a lot of regulatory heat. So, the new technologies in genetic engineering in plants or in agriculture can be quite useful for space, like shortening the harvest time, its size, or energy generation, or energy mass utilization, or anything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have any thoughts on using genetic engineered plants in space? Do you think, is it necessary to, genetic engineering is a necessity for space farming?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, the plants as we have now have been optimized for field production, right? So any breeding or improvement of plants we have done is focused on, mainly yield. And the other things is resistance to pests and diseases, okay? And these are tailored or bred for field cultivation, right? You couldn't really take control of the environment, so you had to, throw your hands up in the air in terms of what happens in terms of the environment. But now, because we can take control of the environment, we know what exact environment we can give the plant. But now we can tailor the genetics that suits for this environment, or we can tailor the genetics such that the plants react in a specific beneficial way under specific environment conditions. So in the equation of the genotype cross environment equals to the phenotype. Before, we could control the genotype. Now we can control both. You can change the genotype at the same time the environment. So there's that interaction that you can play with the plants. So that opens up a whole avenue of plant improvement. So that being said, I do think genetic engineering is necessary for plants in space. At least you have to make them as resource efficient as possible, as short as possible, as fast as possible, fast growing as possible, as nutrient dense as possible. So you have to squeeze the lemon as much as you can. Genetic engineering along with the environment control is a key requirement.
The future of agriculture.
Yes. And then there's also sort of two things. One was where there was a study done where scientists did some gene editing, and they were able to improve the yield of tomatoes. So it's a cherry tomato. I think you can, if you search, you can see that it's quite magnificent.
I know.
So
I think I've made a question. It looked like grapes.
Exactly.
They have copied the genes from grapes, like structural branches, which keeps the grapes intact.
Yeah.
So they copied this structural component into the tomatoes, so they can support the cherry tomatoes in the fashion of grapes.
Spot
right?
on.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
So that's, if you look at the plants, it looks like a bunch of grapes, but it's tomatoes. So that was done to improve the tomato yield. So there's more tomatoes per plant.
Per plant, right.
Yeah, and most of the biomass is tomatoes than the plant. The second hasn't been done practically, at least that I know of now. But I read this a couple of years ago, where it's a theoretical proposition, and it's based on evidence. It's based on what we know, and the scientists were proposing sort of making is it potato or sweet potato? I'm not entirely sure. It could be sweet potato, but it's one of those.
Okay, let's see.
Yeah. So the idea is you edit the whole thing such that you can use every part of the plant. Okay. So it's dwarf, it's fast growing, and you have the tubers that you can use for food. You have the shoots that you can use for tea and salads. You can make it edible, because I think it's sweet potato. Either way, the shoot, the leaves of the plant contains a certain compound that makes it really bitter and inedible. You can't eat it because of that compound. And what they're proposing is you take that out using some gene editing, such that it becomes edible.
Palatable as well.
Yes, palatable and edible, and you can use that as a salad crop. So essentially, you're eating the entire...
Root is for sweet potato, leaf is for salad, and the stem is for something else.
The stem, I think, comes under the salad.
So the concept is the whole part of the plant is utilized for something.
Yeah, and I don't know, I cannot recall if there was some sort of fruits in it, but the gist of it is, you edit the plant such that you can consume the whole thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
When you guys study plant growth, like what you guys also do is monitor its growth, like from germination to its death, right? So what are the factors that you look for? What are the
indicators?
Indicators, plant indicators, like what from root to the leaf. you guys check for?
Okay, let's start from the root upwards.
Mm-hmm.
You can monitor the nutrient solution. But well, it's not directly the plant, but the plant also, takes up nutrients.
The rate of intake.
Yeah, the rate of intake. You can measure that. There are systems where you can monitor the root growth with cameras, and then you move upwards into the shoot. The big one is the chlorophyll content. So how green the plant is. If the plant is not green, if it's turning yellowish, that means some sort of problem. So you can measure this with cameras, computer vision. You can also, there are handheld devices that you can use to measure the chlorophyll index of the plant. And in terms of the growth of the plant, you can measure the canopy area. So how big is the plant, right? So what is the area that the plant is taking up?
Spread out.
The spread. You can also estimate with some neat mathematics and image analysis. You can guesstimate the total leaf area of the plant. You can estimate the biomass based on the leaf area. These systems have to be optimized for each crop because the structure and the architecture for the plants are different. But you could do that using infrared or other wavelength sensors. You can detect plant stress before you can see it with your human eye. And then finally, you can measure the gas exchange, the CO2
transpiration rate.
CO2 and even the transpiration of the plant, which indicates roughly indicates the health of the plant and also how much of or how well it's growing. So the growth rate. The faster the photosynthesis, higher the photosynthesis, faster is it growing, more biomass it'll produce. So these are most of the
factors or changes
you can measure. I mean, there are also things that you can you can snip a leaf off and then analyze the gene activity, analyze the metabolites
on molecular level.
Yes, but that's more time consuming and resource consuming. It's not real time. But again, there are some computer systems where you take a picture of the plant, and based on how red or purple the plant is, you have some plants that are red or purple, which are basically anthocyanins and flavonoids that are produced in the plants. So you can sort of guesstimate, you can train a model to say, based on how much purple you see on the plant, you can train the model to guess how much flavonoids is produced. So things like that. These are crude, but they work. I'll just say one thing. Plants are more crazy and interesting than you think they are. So apparently they can talk, they can scream if you stress them. And they communicate with each other. So we're just beginning to scratch the surface of
the plant science
and plant consciousness, stuff like that.
Plant consciousness.
Yeah. So that's.
Do you have anything in mind on? Did you read anything on plant consciousness?
No, it's just the thing that plants. If one plant in an ecosystem, if one species is under stress or is under attack by, let's say, an insect, the plants can cry out, right, through chemical signals, and these signals can alert other plants about the impending attack from the pest, and they can prepare. They will increase the composition of certain compounds as a defense mechanism before it happens. And it is the communication from one plant to the other that triggers this whole cascade. So things like that is bizarre.
Right.
Plants use microbes, right? Fungi as...
Right. Like it operates as Wall Street, like supply and demand, like fungi supplies nutrients, raw materials, and plants supply nutrients, finished product.
Yeah.
And the exchange is also like, it's not random. It is well measured. If you send this much, plants receive this much, it's the supply demand concept that we use in economics.
And the human centered view, we think we use plants, but is it really? Aren't plants using us? So I say this because there's some research done. So some species produce caffeine in their flowers. And what they found was honeybees that pollinate these plants, right? When they get that caffeine from the nectar, they have a better memory and they come back to the same plant more often and they're more active in pollinating these plants. It's a neat trick where plants are using caffeine to get more pollination from the bees. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this podcast.
Thank you.
Let's continue with another brainstorming podcast, part 2.
Okay.
We'll take a break and come back.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure being here.